All right, the Pitt football team will get started with spring camp again today in the South Side. They'll be back at it after taking the weekend off. But let's talk a little bit of basketball today. Let's talk a little bit of transfer portal, what Pitt needs, what Pitt is going to get, what Pitt would be sort of the ideal outcome, and some of the most important things the Panthers are after in the transfer portal and what it could mean for the team next year. I've got 3 thoughts and possibly more if I get inspired on Pitt and the transfer portal this offseason on today's Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, this is one of those morning pits that could end up having a record scratch. Let's hope not, but you never know how some of those things are going to go between the time you record and the time you publish. There's always, news never breaks on a convenient schedule. News never breaks on a 9 to 5 or something like that. It could be between 9 and 5, and it could be between 9 p.m. and 5 a.m. So you never really know when those things are going to come out, and some of the things we say might. We might have a different opinion. It might be new names that emerge or new events that unfold, and things we'll have to keep an eye on, and maybe we'll have to break this podcast up or break this video up and add a few extra sections in. But as far as we know, here's where things stand, and that's what we'll kind of talk about today on the Morning Pit. It's the Tuesday edition. Glad to get your day started here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. If you're watching this in the morning, you very well may be watching this in the afternoon, in which case we're happy to get your post-lunch day started right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You know what we always ask you to do? Like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Subscribe button is right down there. Make it nice and easy for you, very convenient, to subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, where we put all of our Pitt video content. Whether it's these daily Morning Pitt videos every day of the week, Monday through Friday, our weekly live show that we do every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock with me and Jim Hammett, our post-game shows that we do during the season, and any other videos we might have along the way. Highlights from practice, like later today, press conferences, interviews, all those kinds of things. You find it all right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And if you scroll back through our videos here on the YouTube channel, you see we've got a lot of stuff, and a lot of different types of stuff. These Morning Pit videos make up a whole bunch of it, but not all of it. And so you can find a lot of different things there on the YouTube channel at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And, of course, the website below, Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. There's a lot of ways to say it, but the best way to say it is that it's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Football, basketball, and recruiting, you find it all at Panther-Lair.com, and message boards to interact with hundreds and thousands of other Pitt fans. All day, every day, Pitt fans are hanging out on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com talking about Pitt sports. That's where you should be if you want to join the best online community of Pitt sports fans. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. So into the transfer portal Pitt goes. Panthers have a few open spots technically 2, if you consider that they've lost 4 guys, 2 to graduation and 2 to the portal, and they're bringing in right now 2 freshmen. So you've got 2 open spots to work with. That number might climb, might get up to 3 or 4, might also sort of stay at 2, which means they're looking to bring in 2 guys. But I think ultimately when you're looking at impact players and filling out the rotation and what you have and what you need, probably 2 is a good number to consider. It seems, even though they've done it in the past, I think 2 years ago they brought in how many impact transfers that year? They brought in Nelly Cummings, they brought in Greg Elliott, and they brought in Blake Hinson. So that was sort of, with 3 impact transfers, that feels like the high end of what Pitt's going to conceivably get in most years for a variety of reasons. Either the roles that are available, the NIL funds that are available, because that's part of it as always, or just sort of what you're really able to cap out at and what you're able to bring in. This past year they brought in Ishmael Legan and Zach Austin. It feels like, for the most part, you're going to get 2 impact transfers in most years. And that's probably where the numbers is going to cap. And you might bring in 3 or 4 transfers, but you might, because they brought in Michael Hewitt, right? So that's sort of a great example of, like, that's probably what you're looking at, is 2 impact transfers and maybe another guy to fill out the bench if you have room to do so. And so I think you're really looking at 2 this year. And obviously the focus is in the front court. I mean, the focus is on finding someone to fill the power forward position left open by Blake Hinson. And then ideally someone who can give you something at the center position, something, we could say something more than what they had at the center position this past year, or we could say something different from what they had at the center position this past year. And I think both would be accurate, and both can sort of operate independently. I do think this team could have a different look this coming season based on the transfers that they bring in. Make no mistake about it, this team is going to be dominated by the backcourt, but it could have a different look and a different feel, potentially a different success rate with the players they bring in the front court. And I think when you look at the transfer activity that we've seen so far, the players that Pitt has reached out to, the players that they're bringing in for visits, it's all forwards. Well, the guys coming in for visits are all forwards. We've seen some contact with guards. To me, I think that's sort of just covering their bases, planting a few seeds, making a few connections so that if they need to push hard for guards, or if they're able to sort of bring someone in, they've got those relationships established. But the real focus is on the front court. The real focus is finding forwards to come in to play Hinson's spot and to, let's call it what it is, to beef up the center position. And that's not to say that they've given up on Guillermo Diaz-Graham. I think that's far from it. It's not to say that they don't believe Papa Conti can help them this year. Far from it. I think they're expecting both of those guys to contribute. I think Diaz-Graham far more than Conti. Conti coming off a redshirt year where he, sat out all season with an injury. But I think there's a desire to add to that group, to fill out that group with maybe a more established center, and with ideally a center who can provide a little bit more of that beef down low, a little bit more of that strength down low that they were very obviously missing this past year. Now I that center position I think is tricky. I think there's something very specific they're sort of looking for. I think for Pitt fans who are looking for a big splash, I'm not sure that you're really going to get it, and particularly not at the center position. I think the splash centers, those guys who are going to really just, wow, I can't believe they got that guy, they're going to be out of the price range for a few reasons. We'll get to that in a second. But they're probably going to be beyond what Pitt is capable of doing NIL-wise. And that's just a simple reality of it. But I think you can find guys who can give you some points, probably less than 10 per game, give you some rebounds, probably 10 or less, not 10 or less than 10 per game, and give you some stout defense to provide a little bit more resistance against some of the centers they face in the ACC. I mean, look, when you face highly skilled guys like PJ Hall and Kyle Filipowski, you're going to be at a disadvantage against those guys because they're really good. They're among the best centers in the country. But you want somebody who can bang with Ian Shefflin. You know what I mean? You want somebody who can compete down there and not give up 19 rebounds to one guy on the other team. You want to be able to compete a little bit more where I think they were just lacking in strength. And that lack, ultimately, I think hurt them. And I'm not blazing any new ground here on April 2nd. Everybody's realized this since November 2nd and December 2nd and January and February and March 2nd. We all saw it. We all saw what it looked like with Guillermo Diaz-Graham and Federico. My point is you're not going to all of a sudden have a top 3 front court or a top 3 center group in the ACC with what they're able to get from the transfer portal. What I would contend is that you don't need a top 3 ACC center group to compete and really be at the top of this conference heading into next season. As far as guys who can fill some of these spots, I'm really intrigued by Brandon Johnson. I think Brandon Johnson, a forward from East Carolina, who's going to take a visit to Pitt here in the next couple of weeks. 6'8", 210 guy, a power forward player. In the last 2 seasons, he started 63 games for East Carolina, averaged 13 and 8. Shot 50% from 2 from inside the arc, 43% from the floor, 35% from 3, made almost 2 3-pointers per game. And this past season was even more productive in that regard. He averaged more than 2 made 3-pointers per game, shot 36.5% from 3, 42% from the field, just under 48% from 2. He averaged 14 points and 8.6 rebounds per game. And he's really intriguing to me. I mean, I don't like, just sort of like you have to set aside your dream of getting a big time impact center out of the transfer portal. I don't think anyone is misunderstanding the fact that you're not going to find a Blake Hinson replacement out of the transfer portal. What you do want to find is somebody who can provide some amount of scoring. It'd be nice if they could stretch the defense a little bit to be a stretch for. And I think if you can average more than 2 made 3-pointers per game, you're a threat out there, and you're going to draw defenders out. They can't just leave you, like you see Federico standing by himself outside the 3-point line. I think somebody like Brandon Johnson is going to command that attention and, ultimately get someone, and I think Johnson could do this. And this is probably the guiding principle for every addition they make this season. Someone who can draw at least a little bit of attention away from the backcourt. This team is obviously going to be dominated by the guards. This team is going to be led by the guards next season. And the success of the team is going to come from the guards. And so what you need out of the front court is players who can, make a defense pay if they overcommit to defending the guards. And I think Johnson looks like he's got, the ability to do it. And at his size, at 6'7", 6'8", over 200 pounds, I think he's big enough to be a bit of a force on the glass, averaged, better than 8 rebounds per game over the last 2 seasons and this past year. And I think that's what you would like. Pitt was in such a unique position when they had Blake Hinson at the 4. You know what I mean? Like, nobody has a guy like that. or very few teams have a guy like that because there are very few guys like that. There are very few power forwards out there with Blake Hinson's size who love to live outside the 3-point line. And so you're not going to try and replace that. What you're going to try to do, and I could see this team taking this approach of almost having what I would call a more conventional sort of lineup on the court. A big power forward, a 6'8" guy at power forward, a 6'9", 6'10" center. Not necessarily the guys that you're relying on for your primary offensive drivers, because you're going to have this backcourt, or because you're hoping to have this backcourt that should be the chief, generator of offense for you, whether they're scoring or they're facilitating. And again, we'll talk about the guards in a second. But I think back to what the front courts looked like at Pitt 10 years ago, 12 years ago, 15 years ago, right? Or pretty much any time when they didn't have someone, when they weren't trying to work with a pairing of Blake Hinson and Federico. I mean, that's a pretty unique pairing that you don't have a lot of parallels for, both in terms of Federico's lack of strength and lack of post-up game, and Hinson's obvious offensive prowess as a 3-point shooter. You don't have a lot of comparisons for that. You don't have a lot of comparables and add a lot, direct lines to draw. Like, well, back when they had those guys. So you look at those other years around there and what kinds of 4 or 5 combinations they had. And I think this year's team is going to try to have something a little bit more like those. You say, well, the team went 22-11 this past year with that combination of Hinson and Federico. If you have something different, is that going to put them behind? And I don't think so, because I think the expectations are just that high for the backcourt. And here's maybe the number one thing from my perspective to understand about Pitt and the transfer portal this offseason, and as it relates to transfer portal priorities, as it relates to NIL budgets and how the NIL budget is used. The priority, the number one thing that has to happen is you have to get the guards back, as many of them as possible. And obviously there's 3 guards that we're talking about with Jalen Lowe and Ishmael Leggett and Bub Carrington. And we've talked about this off and on over the last week and a half, both on the Morning Pitt, on the live show, and on the message boards. I think that Carrington is sort of the one that's down the road because he has to make a decision of the NBA versus Pitt. But the other two, Lowe and Leggett, I think, can get done sooner, will get done sooner, and probably are pretty close to being done already for those guys both to return to Pitt, which is huge because the foundation of this team in 2024-25 is going to be the backcourt. It's going to be the guards. As much as we saw the guards sort of lead the team this past season, they still had Blake Hinson, and they were still young. I mean, Lowe and Carrington were freshmen. Leggett was new as a transfer. You bring, at the very least, Lowe and Leggett back next year and add in, Brandon Cummings coming in as a freshman who, I think is going to be ready to contribute in his first year. And then potentially if you bring in Carrington, you've got what should be one of the best backcourts in the ACC. And the kind of backcourt that if you get quality players in the front court, and again, understanding that you're not going to have a Blake Hinson type shooter at the 4, and B, a PJ Hall type or something at center, or a big time take over the game type of center. If you have quality in the front court, the level of play you'll get out of the backcourt, I think, is enough to really make this team exciting and set the ceiling sky high. And so that's why I think the number one priority is getting those guards to return. That I think that's where the main focus has been. I mean, you've seen Pitt reaching out to guys in the portal, and they're obviously bringing guys in for visits. There's a handful of visits that have been set up that we've talked about on the message boards and have been reported and all those kinds of things. And that's important, and they're going to make moves there, and they're going to try to get guys. But the number one thing is getting those guards back. Because if you get the guards back, you've got the table set for some real success next season. I mean, where it's almost not even enough just making the tournament will be a successful season. I think if you have all three of those guards back, Lowe, Carrington, and Leggett, and you get somebody like Brandon Johnson and a decent center, I mean, the expectations are, I think, beyond just making the NCAA tournament. I mean, I think you're talking about a team that should be pushing for, Sweet 16 at the minimum. And I'm not saying they're going to achieve that, but I think if you have all of those guys on the roster, that should be the expectation. And I think probably within the program, that will be the expectation. I think, and I said this on the message boards the other day, if this past season showed anything or taught any lessons or, what was the lasting impression of this season for the program, within the program, I think it's that the expectations are going to be really, really high if they can put together that team that I just described. And I mean, really high. I think they believe that they were really close this year. And I think they all the players who were coming back, I think they got a glimpse of wait, we can be really good. Because this is what we did with, a transfer guard playing for the first time, at this level, and 2 freshman guards playing in college for the first time. You bring those guys back with a year of experience in the ACC, look out. It's going to be scary. And I think that's the feeling within the program, and I think that's, is going to set the expectations really high for where they can go. All right, we'll keep an eye on it. Hopefully we don't have any record scratches. Although at this point we would know if we did, so hopefully we didn't have any record scratches, but news is always good. So we'll be keeping an eye on things, seeing what develops with Pitt in the transfer portal, with visits, with those guards, and where they are at with everything. Of course, stay up on all the latest news at Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, and and the message boards, where we have a lot of Pitt coverage all day, every day. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Thanks so much for tuning in today. I appreciate it. We'll be taking mailbag questions on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. So if you have any questions, make sure you post them there for later in the week. And then we have our live show tomorrow night. So like and subscribe, and we will catch up with you soon. Have a great Tuesday. We'll talk to you tomorrow morning in the Morning Pit right here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.